Like most fiber artists, I do not love making gauge swatches, but it has to be done, and I've built up a bit of a collection, and I think altogether it's actually kind of cool to see what different colors and textures you're using to test your projects, so I dreamed up this little bag that turns them into something useful. There's an optional lining, a drawstring closure, so the bow is super cute, and it uses up 5 gauge swatches. This pattern was originally published in the Q2 2025 issue of Material Girls magazine, which is a free fiber art magazine that you can download. There are free knitting, crochet, and sewing patterns in every issue, interviews with makers, fun girly games, and articles. Check it out, the link will be in the description. To make this pattern, you'll need 5 pre-made gauge swatches, and these can be done with any size needles and yarn as long as they're all the same size square. So I'm showing 4x4 inch classic gauge swatches, but as long as they are square and the same size, you're good to go. To create the drawstring closure, you'll also need some scrap yarn and some corresponding circular knitting needles, whatever size is appropriate for your yarn, scissors, and a tapestry needle. We're going to begin by laying our gauge swatches out in the shape of a cross. So choose which one you want to be the bottom of your bag. I chose this pink one. It's going to be at the center of the cross. The other 4 gauge swatches will form the sides of the bag, so place those around the middle one in the shape of a cross with the bottom edges of the swatch touching the center of the cross. Now get ready for lots of seaming. Grab some scrap yarn. It can be any color because this is going to be an invisible seam, and then cut about an arm's width of yarn off. Tie that onto a tapestry needle, and we're going to begin seaming from the bottom corner of the swatch here. Begin by just pulling the yarn up through the corner to start it off and leave a bit of a tail. We're going to come back to weave that in later. To begin the invisible seam on the swatch on the left, you're going to look for a little V knit stitch to place the tapestry needle underneath. So you see I have 2 sides of the V here, and I'm going to pull the tapestry needle and yarn all the way through to connect that. On the other side, our swatch is facing the other direction. It's going vertically, so we're looking for bars between stitches rather than the stitch itself. So between these 2 rows of stitches here, I can see there's a little bar like this, and that's what I'm going to place my tapestry needle underneath and pull through. Here's another look at that. So going back to the left swatch, finding that V knit stitch to place the tapestry needle underneath and pull through, and then finding that bar between stitches on the right hand side and pulling through there as well. You're going to continue doing this until you've seamed up the entire side, and it should look something like this. When you stand it up, you can see what your bag is going to start to look like, and we're going to just keep going here, continuing to seam on swatches around the center as we go. As before, we're looking for a V knit stitch to pull through on this side swatch. You might have to pull your stitches apart to find this, depending on what stitch your swatch was made in, but you will always find it might just be kind of between rows. So here I found a V knit stitch. I'm pulling underneath both of those sides of the V to connect this swatch for the first time, and then heading over to the center swatch. Since we're making our way around this swatch, we're approaching the stitches from a different angle this time, and we want to look for V's, just like we have been doing with the side swatches. So I'm finding both edges of the V knit stitch to pull the yarn underneath here, and doing that now on both sides, both the center swatch and the side swatch. So here's another look at pulling underneath some knit stitches to connect these swatches together. Doing that same motion over and over to connect the entire swatch. I'm just going to turn my work here to get a better angle on it and continue on with this third side swatch. Again, on the side swatches, we're always looking for those V knit stitches, so I'm going to find 2 sides of the V to pull my yarn underneath here and connect this swatch for the first time. The stitches on our center swatch have changed direction again as we work our way around, so we're back to looking for the bars between stitches on this one. So choosing a column of stitches and always going between them to find the bar there, going back to find a V knit stitch on the side swatch, and back to the same column of stitches to find bars here. Doing that across the entire row to finish off this swatch, and then bringing in the last and final one. Again, we're going to begin by connecting that by finding a V knit stitch on the side swatch. Again, you might have to pull your rows apart a bit in order to find this, but you're going to place the tapestry needle underneath and pull that all the way through before heading over to the center swatch where we're looking for V knit stitches again because we've changed directions. Continuing along that row until it's all seamed and you've created the cross. Now we need to start seaming up the sides of the bag. I'm still going on the same piece of yarn I just needed to reattach to my tapestry needle, but you can attach new yarn at any point. Just make sure to leave an end to weave in later. We have some funny folding to do here because we need all of these edges to match up with each other. It'll make sense when it's more of like a bowl shape for the bag. For the invisible seam here, we're going up vertically on each of these side swatches, so we're going to be looking for the bars in between rows of stitches on both sides, both the left swatch and the right swatch, and as we continue going around these side swatches, it's all going to be bars between the stitches. So here I am looking for one on the right side, and then pulling my tapestry needle all the way through, and going to find one on the right side, just going up and folding the bag as is needed to get these two to seam together. At the very top, we need to finish and cut off this piece of yarn, so I'm just pulling my tapestry needle to the back of the work and then flipping the piece over to weave that end in, just like we would with any of the other ends that we left earlier. Done under a few stitches and it feels secure, you can cut that piece away and you're going to see half of your bag is kind of ready. This is the shape that we're going for. We're going to continue doing this with all of the side swatches going around the bag, folding it however you need to get that invisible seam going, looking for bars between the stitches and working up each side, pulling the yarn through to the back side to weave it in and cut at the end of each row. When all the sides have been seamed up, you will see the beautiful bowl shape of your bag, highlighting all of the beautiful swatches on either side. Now is a great time to flip your bag inside out and weave in all the ends that have been left from seaming. Again, same as before, using a tapestry needle to pull those ends under a few stitches until they feel secure and cutting them off. Now it's time to add the closure to the top of the bag. Begin by deciding where you want the bow of your drawstring to be. I decided between these two cables would be nice. This is the point where we're going to begin picking up stitches. So grab your knitting needles and scrap yarn. We're going to pick up stitches along this entire top edge in a circle. All you need to do to pick up a stitch is place your needle underneath the V stitch that is on the very edge of your swatch, wrap some yarn around it, and pull it back up and through. So this creates another stitch on your needle that you can go back around and knit through. Here's another look at that, just going under the very edge of the swatch, wrapping yarn around and pulling it back up and through. There are now 2 stitches on the needle. We're going to continue doing this around the entire top edge of the bag. As you keep going around, you'll have stitches lined up along the entirety of your circular needles, and when you get to the front, we're going to begin knitting in rib stitch. We're going to start by knitting flat, so turn your work around so you're kind of looking at the back side of your bag and adjust your yarn, and we're going to follow the pattern of 1 knit stitch, 1 purl stitch, which is 1 by 1 rib. So here into the first stitch, knitting, and then into the second stitch, purling, and you're going to continue doing that around the entire top of the bag. Since we are not working in the round yet, when you get to the last few stitches, make sure that you don't keep going in a circle. You want to stop before you get to your first stitch. So here I'm approaching the last stitch. I'm going to purl it, and then I can see that the next stitch is where I began picking up stitches. We're going to turn the work back around to continue working flat. This will create a little opening for the drawstring to fit through, so turning that around, and we're going to continue with the 1 by 1 rib stitch, just going the other direction. So starting with a knit stitch, purl stitch, back and forth, knit and purl across another row. Again, when you get to the end of this row, stop where you have started to pick up stitches. We're going to turn the work around to begin another row of knitting. You can really start to see the opening that's going to be left for the drawstring before starting this third row of 1 by 1 ribbing. Again, it's knit and then purl, and we're doing this flat for this last row. At the end of this row, we're going to begin working in the round, which just means you keep going around and round so that it's seamless. This is going to close off that hole and keep the drawstring encased inside. So here you can see I have my 2 edges, but I want them to start being connected, so I'm just going to keep going along, knitting into this first stitch. They're now connected. We're working in the round and going to a purl stitch around with the same knit and purl repeat. What I failed to remember when I was filming this tutorial was to add in a stitch marker, which is essential because when you're working in the round, you don't necessarily know where the beginning of your row is. Luckily for this one, it's pretty easy to tell because there's a big hole underneath the first stitch. So when I realized I was able to easily go back and correct it, I just added a little safety pin right near the beginning of the stitch. And then when I got around here to the second round, I took that off and put in an actual knitting stitch marker. This just sits on the needle, and every time I hit a new row, I pass it over and know that I can count that row. So headed into the second row now, continuing with that knit and purl repeat to create the 1 by 1 rib structure. And here we go again, finishing off this row with a knit and purl, and then passing over that stitch marker to indicate that we're entering another row. We're going to do 1 more row of that 1 by 1 rib structure, so that's 3 total rows in the round. So to recap, we've done a total of 6 rows in 1 by 1 rib. The first 3 were knit flat, the last 3 were knit in the round. Now we're going to cast off in pattern, which just means we follow the same stitch pattern we've been doing before. So knit the first stitch, then purl the second stitch, and we're going to lift that right stitch over the left stitch to cast it off. Continue going here, so this is a knit stitch, knitting into that, lifting the right stitch over the left, and the next one is a purl stitch, so purling it and pulling the right over the left, doing this across the entire top of the bag to finish off that top edge. At the end of the round, cut off a length of yarn and use it to pull the last stitch closed, and here you'll be able to see the top drawstring piece where we have created a little hole and then finished it off with some round knitting in the top. Let's make the drawstring closure. You have a few options here. I'm going to use scrap yarn and a crochet hook to chain a long piece that we'll use as the drawstring. You could also use an I-cord that you knit. You could also use just a piece of ribbon or yarn that you cut. If you're following along with me, a crochet chain starts by placing a slip knot onto your crochet hook, and all you have to do from there is loop your working yarn over the crochet hook and pull it through the loop that's on the hook. So here again, we're looping over, pulling through. This is a super fast way to build up a chain. You're going to keep going until you reach approximately 28 inches or your desired length. If you're using bigger swatches, have a bigger or smaller bag, you might want this to be longer or shorter. You can check what you're thinking about the length by wrapping it around the top of your bag and hanging out the pieces where they're going to hang out of the drawstring closure. I'm happy with how this is looking, so I'm finishing off my chain by tying a knot and then just taking a tapestry needle and weaving this end up inside of the chain. We've got a little optional interlude here if you'd like to line your bag with some fabric, which I highly recommend. I think it looks really nice and makes it a little more usable. This is completely optional. It'll still obviously work as a bag whether you do this or not. Grab some fabric and you're going to cut 5 squares that measure 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches. This is my measurement because I'm using 4-inch swatches. If yours are bigger or smaller, you want these squares to be the same size as your swatches, just with 1/2 inch added to each side for seam allowance for when you stitch them all together. So 5 squares here, we need to sew them together in the same shape as the other outer part of the knitted bag is. I'm going to show you how to do this by hand, so no sewing machine needed. Start by placing 2 of your pieces good sides together and using sewing pins to hold them in place like so. Lift up the top piece of fabric and use it to connect the next piece. Place them good sides together and again use sewing pins to hold this side in place. Same process one more time. Pick up the top piece of fabric, that should be showing its good side, and connect it good sides together with your last piece of fabric using sewing pins to keep everything in place. Now we need to pin the 2 ends together. So just to look at how this is looking, that's all the good sides, and then on the back you see all your pins like this. Place the 2 short ends together, again good sides together, and use sewing pins to hold that all in place. This has basically created the outer shape of the bag, but it's inside out, so you should see the wrong sides on the outside. We're going to sew down each of these edges to connect them together. If you're using a sewing machine, just sew down each of the edges, super easy. I'm going to show you how to do this with just a needle and thread using your hands. One more piece to attach on here. So take the piece that will be the bottom of the bag, open up the kind of square bowl shaped piece, and attach this to each of the edges. Again, like before, this is good sides together, and we're basically reconstructing the same shape as the bag, but inside out. So watch your hands for pins. They're sticking out all over the place, but you can see how this is the same shape as the bag, and it's going to fit inside of it. Any needle and thread will do. Attach one end of your thread to the eye of your needle and tie a few knots in the other end to stop it from pulling through the fabric. Choose a corner to start in, and we're just going to do a basic stitch here. So I'm pulling through and letting that knot catch, and then going maybe 1/4 of an inch away from that initial knot and putting my yarn back through to the other side of the fabric using the needle. Here's what one stitch looks like pulled through. So this will be on one side of your fabric, and then turn it over and continue the same process going all the way down this seam. So going about 1/4 of an inch further down the line, pulling a stitch through. You're going to keep going along all of these edges that we've pinned together. There's plenty to choose from. Choose your direction. I like to go around with having to change yarn as little as possible. So I was going down one edge, then over on the side at the bottom, up another edge, cutting my yarn, and then restarting with new yarn. You can really do it any which way. You can use different yarn for each of these edges, whatever works for you. You're just doing this simple stitch along all the edges that we pinned to make this kind of bag inside of a bag that will form our lining. Anytime you reach the end of your thread, all you need to do is go back underneath a past stitch with your needle and tie a knot through the little loop that's created there. I usually do this 2 or 3 times just to make sure that it's really secure, and then take scissors and cut it nice and close, and that should hold everything in place. The finished lining should look something like this. We've got basically the same shape, but in fabric. It's a little scrappy, but it will work, and the inside looks perfect. You wouldn't be able to tell whether it was hand sewn or machine sewn. Time to place it in the knitted swatch bag, so make sure that that is facing right side out, and we're basically going to place the entire lining right inside of the bag. So it's wrong sides together, and you can see how when you open up the bag, you'll see that nice inside lining. Incorporating the drawstring here, grab that and put the 2 ends through the hole that we knitted in the last step. From the inside of the bag, I'm pulling the 2 ends to the outside of the bag through that hole, and then just loosely laying the drawstring around the top edge to see about how much I'll need to have left in there. We've got a few things here that we need to get lined up and ready to sew together. If you're not using lining, don't worry about it, just act like it's not there. We're going to fold the top edge of the bag over the drawstring and onto the edge of the lining. I'm again using sewing pins to hold this all in place, which I find super helpful since we've got so many moving parts around the edges. When you have everything tucked and pinned in place, you should basically be able to see what the bag is going to look like. So now we've just got to sew it all in place. Grab some more scrap yarn and cut a length that's about 2 to 3 times the circumference of your top of your circle. Connect it to a tapestry needle, and we're going to begin sewing through the top edge of the bag. Again, just a basic sewing stitch going back and forth with the needle from the front to the back of your fabric. You want to catch the lining and the top edge of the drawstring closure to hold those in place without going through the actual drawstring itself, because that will stop it from moving within this channel that we're creating. A lot to think about, I know, but I promise it makes more sense as you're looking at it and doing it. When you get to the end, put your needle underneath a passed stitch, pull through a little loop, and you can tie a knot in there. And then weave in one more end, just like you have been with the others, cut that off, and your bag is complete. Lining and drawstring all in place, ready to use. You close it just by tugging on these two drawstring ends, and that will close up the top of your bag. You can tie it with a bow like this. Of course, the stars of the show are all the gauge swatches, so I'm really excited to see what yours look like based on what swatches you have hanging around. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you're looking for some more fun, free knitting, crochet, and sewing patterns, head to materialgrrrlz.com, where we have a whole library full of them, as well as a whole library of past magazines. So if you want to read old issues of Material Girls magazine, they have knitting, crochet, sewing patterns, and them other fiber art fun. You know where to head, materialgrrrlz.com. Thanks so much for joining for this tutorial today. Have a good one.